thank you for listening to the Drinks.com podcast, the business of online alcohol. I'm your host, Brandon Amoroso, and today I'm talking with Johan Eide, who's the founder and owner of Region and Sampl, businesses whose goal is to redefine how wine is experienced and shared. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Brandon.
So before we dive into some of the topics that we want to cover today, can you give everybody just a quick background on what Region and Sampl are, as well as some of your background too?
Well, I'm Johan, founder of Region, along with Carrie Theodorf. We started Region and Sampl back in 2019. And before that, I was an engineer at Cal Poly, and I had a senior project that introduced me to patent law. And so I took the bar and practiced patent law for 4 or 5 years before starting Region and Sampl. And so definitely didn't see myself as an engineering student entering the wine industry, but saw a problem, and what was going to be a side business now has snowballed into 2 parallel brands under VineShift Inc. in Region and Sampl. And like you said, is we have 2 brands under the entity. We can get into that more, but it's a little bit of my background coming from engineering and then over into the wine industry. I grew up in Russian River Valley, always surrounded by wine. Always made a Pinot Noir with my dad in Sebastopol, California, but it was never really my focus of, is this going to be a career path or not? And it wasn't until we started the side hustle of Region, as I thought was going to be a weekend business, that really found some traction in market and hit a chord, I think, with some of what today's consumer is looking for in wine.
And how did you ultimately decide to make that leap from, law over to the wine side of the world?
Yeah, like I said, I thought I could pull off both, and then COVID made that decision really clear for me. I mean, I put my name on the lease and personally guaranteed the lease in the end of 2019. And we were going to be doing build out of, between January to June of 2020. And everybody knows what happens in March of 2020. And at that point I said, I have to make this work. We have to somehow open our doors. We had people come in, pour wine out of the machines with their mask and then taste in the parking lot. And then a few months later we had all the fires. So it was a very interesting first year, but it wasn't I was trying to do both, and then life came back and said, nope, you're only going to do this one path.
It's interesting how sometimes we get that nudge or push in one direction or the other. I feel like, personally, at a certain point you can only balance so many things, and there's a lot of, power in having one singular focus and being able to expand on that. When it comes to, why you wanted to start Region and Sampl to begin with, and sort of which one came first? Was it Region? Was it Sampl? And how has that evolved over time?
Yeah, it was definitely Region. Sampl was a fun idea that Region could do to take, single serve glasses home with you from the physical stores. But really it was Region, and what got me excited to start Region was in my hometown there was a development called the Barlow. It's sort of like Tin City and Paso Robles, if you're familiar with Tin City and that concept. But it's meant to be a maker marketplace where there's 3 or 4 breweries. Costa Brown was in there, which is a very renowned Pinot Noir producer from Russian River Valley, and it's now owned by Duckhorn. But there's 3 or 4 restaurants, and there really wasn't a wine bar aspect to it. And I watched my hometown kind of be transformed by this development. And ultimately it started from, I wanted to put all the law offices, or at least have a law office in the Barlow, because it was the spot to be. And I thought, how could I put the law offices in the back and some sort of wine bar concept in the front? And in that process, I stumbled onto the State of the Wine Industry reports by Silicon Valley Bank. That would have been the 2020 or 2019. The 2019 State of the Industry report. And there were some comments and some trends that were in there that were really polarizing to me. And one of them from my home county is, 8 years in a row, tourism was up before COVID to Sonoma County, but also for 6 or 7 years in a row, tasting and visitation was down. So how is this possible if we're one of the fastest growing wine growing regions, such a destination of travel? Why is tasting and visitation going down, and what is changing in today's consumer? And really, it was those Silicon Valley state of the wine industry reports that really got me excited, or I felt that maybe saw something here that was evolving in the industry and what the consumer wants. And that to me was okay. How can we do a concept in the Barlow that's addressing that?
And is this your first foray into running your own business?
So I would say we had before I had My Patent Guys, which was like a little boutique firm where a few different patent agents and myself teamed up to do our own business and just sort of be boutique patent consultation and patent prosecution for different inventors and small companies. So that was technically the first business that I had built a website for and figured out how to do Google business ads. And we did overflow work for other law firms. And before that, how I got into patent law was my best friend and I loved to go fishing, and we fished in college. So we invented a touchscreen satellite fishing scale that turned into a patent, and then we ended up licensing those patents. Where now that scale will be the official scale of Major League Fishing coming out next year. So it was that's how I got into patent law originally. Was we were college kids who were trying to solve a problem in the fishing industry and ended up inventing something. And then I paid somebody $450 and $750 an hour to write a patent, and that's what sparked my interest. Is I was like, how are I can become a patent agent? These guys are making what? And I really liked it. I liked the technical aspect of it, of how does this work? How did they creatively draft the claims? I already knew how to model it and do the drawings. So it was a natural path. And I figured as if I did R&D engineering or mechanical engineering anywhere, whoever would hire me would also find it valuable that I also had passed the patent bar and could be in-house counsel for them.
Is there any application that you've of that patent uh, experience that you've taken over to Region or Sampl?
Absolutely. For Sampl, we have 4 design patents and two pending, one granted utility application and some PCT applications as well. And we can get into more of, I don't setting up a basis of what Region and Sampl are, but really on Sampl was our digital tasting experience. Now we have that whole, you could actually patent a method of doing business. So we've patented that entire digital interaction from those wine sampling kits onto onto a purchasing platform.
Got it. That's a Just an interesting sort of overlap there between the two businesses. But you definitely chose, one of the hardest industries to jump into. Did you understand, or at least,
Nope, not at
the,
all.
the overwhelming complexity that goes into running an alcohol business?
No, I joke now that I should, and I feel like now I do compliance law because of how much we've had to learn, and we're trying to push the boundaries in the wine industry. So, really trying to push the 3-tiered system to see, what is innovation doesn't really mesh with the 3 tiers at all, and so that was probably a huge learning curve, and I wouldn't recommend that anyone do a startup in alcohol at all. At all. It's probably one of the hardest parts, if not the hardest part, of starting out, because every time we felt that first year or two we wanted to do something, council came back and said, "Yeah, you can't do that," or "That's a great idea, and everyone would love to do that, but you can't do that." And even from the brick and mortar perspective of the locations and what we are trying to do and pull off there, we it was, yeah, I was very underestimated the compliance and alcohol complexity.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely shocking for outsiders entering the industry, but I think it's a good thing as well. Outsiders coming into the industry, because it, pushes the envelope a bit more, and you ask those questions, like why the hell is this the way that it needs to be done, or why are all of these sort of roadblocks in place? Um, and I feel like the outsiders are also a little bit more uh, confident or willing in their ability to push those boundaries versus trying to stay within the lanes.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's probably because I'm a very stubborn Norwegian and want to always find out it's the engineering mindset of there's a problem, like there's always a solution. We're just not thinking about it. What are we thinking about it wrong, or how are we thinking about it wrong? And I think that you are also another great example of someone coming into the alcohol industry with a fresh perspective of what you've done at drinks and even other ventures. But it's exactly what you said. When I started seeing how many wineries are operating on wine direct, and I won't go into other names, but even more antidated e-commerce platforms and some of the points of sale. I don't know how all the employees don't quit right away. I mean, it's like I came in, I was like, why isn't everyone on Shopify Plus? This doesn't make sense. And there's certain things that everybody needs, but yeah, it's that fresh outside perspective, because I do still feel that the wine industry is, 10-15 years behind adopting the most available technology,
Yeah,
historically. um,
there's definitely been an approach within the industry where a lot of the tech is built specifically for alcohol, um, and I feel like maybe that's the way that it had to have been done 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, but inherently that's limiting because there's only so many wineries. Whatever the number is now, maybe it's 13,000. There's only so many breweries, there's only so many distilleries, especially in the US. So these companies that are creating this tech that does, let's say email and SMS marketing, or does, commerce, or does, insert function here, are inherently capped because they have a defined sort of total addressable market that's never going to increase beyond a certain size. So they're never going to have 4,000 engineers because the business revenue will never be able to support that. Um, and I think the ecosystem in general, when it comes to commerce, is moving towards like one or two absolutely just giant platforms that other companies who can also be pretty sizable. I mean, if you look at some of the Shopify app companies out there, you're looking at 500 employee companies, 1,000+ person companies, but then they build additional or specific functionality into that platform, and then sort of the rising tide lifts all boats. Um, so I feel like that's sort of the headwinds that the alcohol industry has been facing, and then up until the partnership between Drinks and Shopify, and then also some uh, businesses like CBI sort of taking that first leap to work with the Shopify, there was a hesitancy to go over to a platform that wasn't built specifically for alcohol. Because for the last 30 years, people have been hearing time and time again that it's not safe for you. It's not this. It's not that. It needs to be special just for you, um, which isn't the case. And I think leads itself to how consumers are like looking for different things in the wine world today than they are 30 years ago, and especially in the younger generations, that like digitally native consumer expects a shopping experience online that's robust and streamlined, but that's also integrated with like the in-store experience, which I think ultimately is one of the unique components of your business, is that you have both. You have that in-store tasting experience, but you have the online as well as sample.
Yeah, and how do you own businesses on multiple tiers and stay 100% compliant is also something we've learned over 4 years. But yeah, it's like you said, we set out to ultimately be a marketing platform for both the Region brand and the Sampl brand. So in your intro, you described us as like kind of our main tagline of, we're here to change how wine is experienced and shared. Well, we're doing that in a brick and mortar format with Region, and then we're doing that remotely with Sampl. And what we set out for both brands, it was funny as we started Region and then Sampl emerged out of Region. The same core problems that were defined in, the State of the Industry Wine Report in 2019, all the way to the same problems we're addressing in a physical product versus a brick and mortar space held true. Um, and it was a nice evolution of how do we take our in-store experience home with you with Sample. And really, I think, and I'd love to get your opinion too on both of these, but we set out to solve a set of problems for producers, but also solve a set of problems for the consumer. Um, and we can like go into either of those, but for the producer end, traditionally the tasting room is where that bond, that relationship is formed. They fall in love with your brand and want to join the club, want to make a purchase, want to continue supporting what you have. And the key there is, getting them to your tasting room. Where in Sonoma County, it's an average of 1.5 tasting room visits a day. So if there's how many 400 plus wineries, how are you that one winery that they go to? And in an emerging tech world, people are already have their Airbnb planned out. They're already pre-mapping, the route that they're going to drive that day or the driver they're going to have. And they might never know about the hidden gems that are in Russian River Valley or there. So what we set out to do with Region was to become a platform, to be a marketing platform or a central hub for those stories, for those medium, small size producers who either couldn't afford their own tasting room or wanted to have an urban presence from their more remote tasting room. That's what we set out to solve, and to offer an experience that's very approachable while doing that.
What are some of the, I guess, conversations that you've had with producers over the past couple of years as you've been building Region? Is the pitch to them that they're able to get in front of more of these customers, and then that there's they they discover the winery in the Region tasting room, and then they ultimately will end up becoming a customer of X, Y, or Z winery?
Yeah, it's meant to be a starting point or an introduction to that brand. And, as a retailer, we're just advertising our own products. We're not, specifically facilitating any tastings or wine club member signups. But again, we're free to feature our own products that we're selling in store and really want to tell that story of what does Sonoma County, what does SLO County have to offer. And as you mentioned, a lot of our conversations with producers are searching for a solution like this, a solution to, oh my gosh, how do I raise 400, 500,000, start my own tasting room, make that back over 3 years? And how, even though I can start my own tasting room, how am I competing with an experience? How am I getting people there because of the quantities and concentrations of wineries in these wine growing regions? So when you really look at it, and if you put your hat on from a producer's perspective, 88% of small producers produce 5,000 cases or less. So when you're producing that amount of volume and getting started, you don't really have the extra income to pull this off viably in the first year. And 78% of direct to consumer sales for most producers right now start in the tasting room. So it's really really hard to get going. So the concept of Region was very well received by those initial. In 2019 we had 25 winery partners coming in, and we were licensed and operated in a completely different way than we do right now. But still, that holds true as we have over 35, what we call winery partners, just wineries that we purchase from right now, that are featured at each Region location. And that is still holding true and still relevant of how can we compliantly cross promote? How can we, like you mentioned with Shopify, rising tide lifts all boats. How can we work together in a three-tiered system compliantly? I think the legal side of me is also coming out here trying to, asterisk compliantly, but work together and solve this problem that so many producers are facing.
Yeah, I think there should just be a big asterisk with anything when it comes to compliance. Um, but I am by no means the compliance expert here on our end, nor do I have any interest in ever becoming that. Uh, it's it's quite the beast. Um, you mentioned 78% of D2C sales start in the tasting room, and I think that's a unique opportunity that wineries have, like wineries themselves, but also businesses like yours to capitalize on the fact that you have that retail location that maybe a traditional Shopify brand that I'm used to working with does not. Whether it's you know shoes or coffee or skincare and beauty, whatever it may be, they don't have the location and they also don't have the tourism component to it. I feel though that there, at least from my visits to Napa, especially the one I did last summer, while a lot of the sales originate in the tasting room, there could be a lot more sales coming after that tasting room visit happens than is currently occurring because the follow-up communication isn't there, the experience post visit to the winery isn't really there, and it just feels like such an untapped opportunity that only wineries and businesses like yours are set up to tap into because you have the tourism, because you have the tasting room location. Now it's just let's add on that commerce component. So when we have these people who visit, and a lot of people will only visit Napa once in their life, let's capture them as a customer. And then when they go back to wherever it is, Chicago, West Virginia, Florida, insert state here, we can have them on our club for 5 or 10 years, or we can continue to market to them thereafter via email or text or direct mail. There's not a lot of that being done yet. And even I signed up for all the lists when I went to these various wineries that wineries owned by public companies all the way down to sort of small mom and pop shops, but pretty much across the board, it was not a cohesive experience after that first purchase.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And we wanted to go even a little bit deeper, or dive into that a little bit more with what we're trying to solve at Vine Shift with Region and Sampl is more of how are you also making that purchase approachable, whether it's the in-store experience or at home, where I'm sure on those winery visits, that you went to in Napa, that were they like traditional wine tasting experiences where you had a flight, you sat through that flight, and then there's an upsell or a call to action, whether it's a card or the staff came out to you and said, well, your flight's free if you sign up for the wine club. And that's still a great upsell and always will be, but were they traditional experiences like that?
Yeah, they were traditional for the most part, but for the ones where maybe I just bought one bottle, I haven't heard from them again, like since that purchase, which to me is mind-boggling because I like some of them, and frankly, I can't even remember what some of them are at this point because there was never that follow-up. Hey, it's been a month since your visit. Do you want to reorder what you had purchased during the tasting? Um, things like that I think are really low hanging fruit because like most, I'd say actually all of them, all the tasting room experiences were phenomenal. Like you know, they, they really know what they're doing when it comes to managing that 1 to 4 hour window of whatever experience it may be, and really immersing you in the history and what makes the wine different and unique. It's just not being translated online in an effective manner yet.
Yeah, and it's only expanding in time there, right? Like I don't remember the numbers on it, but it's like every year that tasting room experience per winery is growing longer and longer. It's no longer 3 wines, it's 5 wines, now it's 7 wines. And when they have you there, they're doing such a great job and focusing so much of how do we keep you here, and also how do we apply that pressure of that sale at the end. I mean, there's wineries that do that flawlessly, and there's wineries where their wine does the speaking for them, right? They don't have to have that sales process around it, and you're there on property, and the property is a sales tool as well. But ultimately what we're also trying to do is the portions of tasting, so the smaller, what is the minimum barrier of entry that I can have to have you taste this wine and see if you like it. But also, I think the main mind shift that we try to base all of our decisions off is how are we putting the control of the tasting experience in the hands of the consumer, whether it's in store or at home. Um, a lot of people come into Region and just have a glass of wine and do emails and leave. You know that it's that approachable. It should feel like a brewery, um, rather than the other way around.
Yeah, I think the like making it as easily accessible as possible, um, especially for a younger and younger consumer, is important because at least historically, I would think of wine as sort of more upper class, a little bit more hoity-toity, for lack of a better word. Not necessarily like a brewery, like it's fun, you can go hang out. It's not so white glove. You have to smell. There's all these different varietals. There's um, a lot of stuff that goes into it. But I feel like there's been quite a movement towards sort of demystifying wine and also making it more approachable. Um, and that's important too because younger consumers are not drinking wine in the way that they, that like a, blanking on what the terms are here, but like a Gen X or even a millennial is drinking wine. Gen Z is looking at a lot of alternative options in the marketplace, whether it's packaging, which I think you're obviously at the forefront of with looking at different packaging options. But there's RTDs as well. Not to even get into seltzers, low cal, no sugar, zero alcohol, alternatives with CBD or even cannabis drinks. I don't live in California anymore, but when I was there was a bunch of people who'd go to parties and they're having a cannabis RTD instead of a beer or wine or whatever it may be. Um, but I think a lot of that leads back to the consumer experience because if you look at the brands that are successful right now with Gen Z or like that younger millennial, some of them are wine as well, but it comes down to the marketing, the online customer experience. It's not necessarily the product category. I think that's deterring people who are younger from drinking wine. I think it's more so the way that these businesses are set up. Um, the seltzers are tapping into influencer marketing and TikTok, and some of the wine in a can brands like Nomatica or Bev or Sample are on Shopify, which frankly is night and day difference from other commerce experiences and is what somebody like my age is expecting when they purchase from a brand. So I think as technology progresses, we'll see more and more of that adoption in the younger consumer as well.
Yeah, I think the even today, even not the younger, but just you know, even above millennials, right? They're on social media as well. Their attention span is also dropping, and everyone's searching for healthy and authentic choices. And it's just like you said when you talked about NA beers or seltzers or RTD cocktails, right? It when people want something, they want to know full transparency, what is inside this and who made this, and that hasn't always been there in the wine industry. That some of that transparency was purposefully blocked, to have the allure, to have the mystery around the wine there. But also, it was never necessary. And it's evolved so much over the last few years. But that's why all these emerging competitors to wine are emerging, whether it's cannabis or hard liquor and cocktails being thought of as a more healthy choice, like you said. But it's through those choices that really I think there's still an opportunity because when today the current generations millennials do buy a bottle of wine or have a glass of wine, they do tend to lean towards the higher end spectrum. They tend to if I'm only going to have a glass of wine, I want the best glass of wine, and that's also relevant to if you can look at the trends of cocktail bar success and the explosion of high-end cocktails and cocktail bars. People would rather go to a nice bar, have a nice experience with one really expensive cocktail than three well drinks, at the bar. That's kind of what that's evident in the trends that I see.
Yeah, one of the most shocking things to me entering the alcohol industry um, is private label at some of these massive retailers, and how pervasive that is, and that customers really don't understand that. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but like some of your favorite brands at your store are probably not real in the traditional sense. They're not coming from the winery that's represented on the label, because the label is just a label, which is ultimately how most consumers shop. But I mean, if you were to go into a Trader Joe's, I almost guarantee that maybe let's say there's 100 Italian products, maybe it's only 20 products, but each product has five different labels on it to try and appeal to a different type of customer at a different price point or whatever it may be. And that was pretty shocking to me as well. So I think it's really cool, what Region and Sampl are doing with going directly to those small producers and highlighting them in a way that they're not going to be able to get that exposure through an outlet like a Trader Joe's. They're not big enough. And for the consumer who cares about where their product is coming from and wants to know the history and the backstory, it's a really unique experience and opportunity for them.
Yeah, and right. We all know the e-commerce businesses that have tried to solve or tried to tap into the next generation of wine drinkers, or just do something different in wine, and they've taken that approach to it, right? Like, um, in a sense, they've said, okay, yeah, our consumer isn't smart enough to tell that this is essentially a made up winery, and that's going to catch up to everybody in the wine industry, in my opinion. And there's a place for white label, and man, there's some awesome wines at Trader Joe's. Actually, when you really, if you look at who's actually selling bulk to them and what they're doing. So I'm not saying that there's not amazing wines and also what white label or private label brings down the price point that's accessible to the consumer in the market. But for us, it's sort of like vinyl records. I know that that's a weird parallel to make, but everybody thought that records were going to go away. But why are records so popular again now? It's because it's tangible. It's something that I can touch. I feel like I'm supporting the artist. It feels more raw and authentic to still have a vinyl record, and you still can't replace the people. If you're in the wine industry and you're trying to replace the story and the people and manufacture that, and totally understand that some people are trying to do that to just work through the three-tier system. You, like it's probably the easiest way in certain aspects to work through the three-tiered system to eliminate that story and brand and authenticity. But there's also a way to do it compliantly, and that's what today's consumer is looking for. And that's really where the retention is going to come from in the long run, right? You might lure them into a flash purchase, or you might lure them into a one-time purchase, but are they sticking around? Are they continuing to find value in your product over time? Um, what is the LTV? It's really hard to have an LTV when there's no real brands in what you're selling.
I think the Trader Joe's shopper is more a Trader Joe's shopper than they are, whatever the wine is. Whereas if you were to go into maybe like a Ralph's, you're purchasing wine, that you're more of like a purchaser of that wine than necessarily like a Ralph's, aficionado. So there's obviously some overlap and whatnot. But um, I want to ask a couple of fun questions before we tie off here. Um, and so if you're ready, I'll start with the first one. So, what is your favorite wine ever?
Um, well, I'll just say the first one that popped into my mind. It's Devil Proof Malbec by Aperture Cellars in Healdsburg. That is just an awesome Malbec, and a really great story and branding as well. But just an awesome Malbec. So that's the first wine that popped into my mind.
Okay, this is how I'm going to continue to build out my cellars through these podcasts. Interesting.
Yeah, Aperture's great. Jesse Katz is a great winemaker with a lot of history in the area, but what they're doing in Aperture is really setting the tone for Healdsburg, in my opinion.
Awesome. And then second question is, if you had to pick anyone to share a glass of wine with, who would it be?
Oh, um, wow. I'll also just go through what popped into my mind first. A while ago, I saw Elon Musk on the top of the Gigafactory having a glass of whiskey and making s'mores at an open fire on top of the Gigafactory, and I'd love to be there and have a glass of wine with him and pick his brain.
That's a good choice. There's a lot going on in that brain, I think. So it would be a very interesting conversation, and hopefully a healthy pour for that glass of wine. Oh, that's awesome. That's all that we have for today. Thank you for coming on the show. Before we hop off, can you let people know where they can find you online, Region, Sampl, and yourself as well?
Yeah, please follow us at Drink Region or Drink Sample on Instagram. And that's the same as our website. So you can go to drinkregion.com if you want to visit any of the locations, or Drink Sample if you want to try out Sample or subscribe. Every quarter, we release a different wine growing kit from a new wine growing region. So you'll get shipped a capsule like this with 7 glasses of wine inside of it. You can book a tasting, there's recipe pairings, watch a video from the winemaker, and even buy a bottle if you like it. So really appreciate you, Brandon, taking the time today and having us on, and look forward to talking again.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for coming on. For everybody listening, as always, this is Brandon Amoroso. You can find us at drinks.com, and we will see you next time.